Hi everyone, it's Chaitni. I am a mindset and nutrition coach. So I help my clients cope with stress, burnout, or anxiety through healthy habits, lifestyle changes, and proper nutrition. So every week I drop a video related to overall wellness and holistic well-being. If that interests you, then make sure to subscribe to my channel so you know right away when I drop a video. So in this week's video, I'll be talking about a fairly sensitive topic, and I just want to forewarn you. The topic is why trauma has an impact on our bodies, really the how and why of it. What is the relationship between trauma and what it does to our bodies? So this might be a tough subject for some of you, and that's totally fine. So I just want to let you know up front in case this video may not be for you. So basically, trauma, especially significant trauma, if you've experienced it, it can really alter our lives, especially if you've experienced verbal, physical, and or sexual abuse in early childhood. It can have a lasting impact, not just on your life, but your relationship with food. And eventually what happens is that trauma builds a permanent home within you. And no matter how much you try to change the life that you're living, especially your relationship with food, it feels almost impossible to make a permanent change. So that is why I want to talk about trauma today. And the video is going to be broken up into two parts. So part one is I just want to explain how trauma and diet are connected. And then the second part is how you can start to heal some of that trauma if you feel ready to do so. So to explain the why bit, there are two reasons. The first reason is that food becomes temporary comfort. So someone who's experienced any kind of trauma or has PTSD, they will use food or alcohol or basically their diet as a coping mechanism. So the people who were supposed to protect you and keep you safe in your childhood, when they fail to do so miserably, you're going to turn to what is easily accessible. And the most accessible thing for everybody is food. So it's very natural to turn to food to find that comfort, to feel better, to cope with the shame if that's what you experience, to cope with the fear, to cope with the anger. Food becomes your go-to, as does alcohol, if that is something that is a part of your diet. So that is an important piece to understand. Now, the reason number two is that food or that alcohol really is a protective mechanism. Think of it as an actual shield that your body is using to protect you from reliving that trauma, the possibility of even reliving that trauma, or even going back to that place and, those memories coming up, those fears, the feelings, all of that. It's a way to just shut yourself off from feeling any of it. So there, as I explained, there are two parts, right? Or there are two reasons. The first reason is that it's a protective mechanism, and then the second reason is it's really comfort that you're looking for. So it's important to understand both these reasons, because a lot of times we're just complete jackasses to ourselves. That is the only way for me to put it. When we eat a certain way or when we eat certain foods, we are so hard on ourselves. So if you experience weight gain or obesity, you need to come from a place of zero judgment, and you need to realize why you're indulging in the habits that you've developed and why they're not working for you. The same thing applies, if this is not something you've experienced, it's really to help you cultivate some compassion, some empathy, and some understanding for others who might be turning to food to cope with their past or to cope with their traumas. So again, that judgment needs to not be allowed for ourselves or for other people. Same thing with labels. It's very quick for us to label someone as fat, as thin, as ugly, beautiful, dark, light skinned, whatever we can come up with. But we need to drop those labels because we really have no idea why people are turning to food the way they are, or why they're turning to alcohol the way they are. All we can do is try and understand and hopefully support them in their journey to release that trauma so they can live the life that they wish to live. So with that behind us, let me move on to some ways that can help you heal from the trauma. So first and foremost, the number one way is to seek the help of professionals. This might be hard for some of us because when we think of therapy or when we think of going to a psychiatrist, a lot of times the way mental health is perceived is that, oh, you must be crazy if you're on meds. Or, you're such a weakling, you can't deal with what's going on in your life and you need to go pay for therapy. Well, that's all nonsense. That's the best way to put it. When you have experienced some really profound trauma and you have PTSD from it, sometimes that trauma is also hidden. It's so deep-rooted, it was so painful that you've shut a tight lid on it and you don't even recall that you went through it, but your body is still holding on to it. So you're going to see it trickle into your relationships. You will see that trauma trickle into the lifestyle that you're living, the choices that you're making of the people around you, the food you eat, the alcohol, or anything that you consume. So it still has an impact. It's still living in your body. So the best thing that you can do is try to release that. But doing it all on your own can be scary. It can be tricky. And it can just be very overwhelming. So that is why I say one of the first things you can do is find a really good therapist, and if needed, find a really good psychiatrist. Now, talk therapy is fantastic. I've done it for many years, and it did wonders for me. But you also want to try and find a therapist who's going to help you get over that trauma and start to live the life that you wish to live. So it's not just about talking and reliving the memories. Yes, of course, that's going to be a part of it, but you also want somebody who's going to start to hold you accountable and start to hold your hand and show you in ways that you can actually enjoy the life that you want and live the life that you want. So before you can try any other ways of healing your trauma, you really have to sit with those feelings. You have to acknowledge them and you have to address them. And the beauty of having a therapist or a psychiatrist is you don't need to do it on your own. Now, tip number 2 is, or another way that you can start to heal is by practicing yoga. I know that might seem like, yoga? But yes. So as I said, trauma resides in our bodies. All the emotions that we've had associated with that trauma, they live on. They're in our bodies. So when you start to do yoga, you start to release some of that. And of course, you want to do poses that you find non-threatening. There might be happy baby, that might not be for you, especially if you've experienced certain kind of abuse, but it might be for somebody else, and that's okay. Listen to your body and listen to your heart. Do poses that you're comfortable doing. We store a lot of trauma in our hips. So if you have tight hips, those are the kind of yoga poses that you want to do. You want to stretch out those hips. You want to try and do pranayama, which is breath work. And you want to practice that mindfulness so you can start to feel safe and grounded, and you can start to live in the present. Because with that trauma, we are constantly living in the past, and it's this monkey on our back. No matter where we go, it's this monkey. And it really has an impact on the decisions that we make and the lives that we live. So by having that pranayama, that mindfulness, all of those stretches, you slowly start to realize that it's here and now that matters. And this is where you can make the choices that you wish to make. So tip number 2 is consider yoga. Ultimately, yoga will really teach you to surrender and to let go. Because that is a big part of releasing the trauma, is letting it go. Now, tip number 3 is, this one might also be surprising, is trying improv theater. So when you try improv, you're kind of on the spot and you're being asked to improvise. So the beauty of it is you start to socially reconnect with others, because one of the side effects of trauma is you tend to isolate. You keep people at a safe distance. You're too afraid to be vulnerable, and all of that is understandable. But when you're in this environment of improv, a lot of that sheds itself, and you're in character and you're just playing a role. But what you're actually doing is coming face to face with the feelings and with the tough questions. And so especially you want to do improv as therapy. So it's not just any kind of improv, but they do have special improv theaters that focus on trauma victims. So those are the ones that you probably want to seek out. But what that's going to do is it's going to teach you to reconnect, to become a part of this world again, fully and wholly. It's also going to teach you to trust, because that's one of the biggest things that's lacking when you haven't gotten over your trauma. And it's also really going to help you answer some tough questions and to really see yourself for who you are, and that is a survivor. And then tip number 4 is really for all you music lovers, which who really isn't a music lover? But if you really enjoy music, you can start to make it a part of your life to heal that trauma. So you can be prepared. What I mean by that is, you obviously need to have an understanding of your triggers. What is really that sets you off? What sets off those alarm bells in your head? For example, I can tell you, when I'm alone in an elevator with a stranger, especially a male, the first thing I think of is an exit strategy. And that comes from some past trauma, which I am still working on. That part of me is not fully healed. But that's my, reactive mechanism. That's how I handle that situation. So when you have those triggers, sometimes they can leave you completely debilitated. Just being in an elevator for 15 seconds with a stranger, thankfully, doesn't have that impact on me. But something worse might. So understand your triggers. What are they? And when you do, have ready to go playlists. Make your playlist based on the trigger. So if your trigger is, people yelling, and that, really brings back some ugly memories from childhood, it makes you anxious and it makes you really nervous, then maybe you have a playlist for that. If it's really dealing with criticism and that's a big trigger for you, all right, then you go ahead and have a playlist for that. So have 4 or 5 playlists, or how many ever you want, of your favorite bands, your favorite artists, your favorite songs that actually speak to you, because music speaks to you. It speaks to everybody. Someone may just have one favorite song, but there's a reason why it's their favorite. So find those songs for yourself and have those ready-made playlists, because they can be your go-to tool when that trigger hits and you have no idea how to cope with it. Okay, this last one can be a little tough, but totally worth it. When you feel ready, sit down and figure out what you would tell your younger self. That self that experienced the trauma, right after you experienced the trauma, or right when you were living with the trauma. And figure out, how would you give that self of yours the love, support, and protection that you didn't get when you were living that trauma. So this can bring up a lot, just a lot. It's best to do this with someone you trust, someone who is a professional. So really a psychologist is a great option. When I did it with my therapist, and I will tell you that I could not stop sobbing for, I think, straight 10 minutes or so. I couldn't even formulate a sentence. It was so hard for me. And if you do this enough times, and if you do it really from your heart, what you will notice is a sense of forgiveness. You will be able to release that shame that's associated with the trauma. Because a lot of times with trauma victims, we feel guilty. We feel guilty for what happened, and we feel like we deserved it. We messed up, so we deserved to be beaten. We deserved to be verbally abused. We deserved to be physically violated over and over again. But that's not true. That's not reality whatsoever, but that's the story we tell ourselves so we can make it and we can survive this world. So that story has to end at some point. Those lies have to end at some point. So when you have this conversation with your younger self and what you would tell that younger self, and you just need to visualize it, close your eyes if that would help. You will have a pretty deep conversation. And initially, if you're angry, or if you're embarrassed, or just pissed off at that younger version of you, it will turn. I promise you. It will get to a point where you will feel unconditional love, appreciation, and just so much regard for being a survivor, because that's what you are. Like I said earlier, what you've done is survive something that basically was an earthquake in your life, or repetitive earthquakes in your life. So those are the 5 ways that you can start to heal. Number 1 is seek the help of professionals. Number 2 is consider yoga. Number 3 is try and have ready playlists, especially for your triggers. Number 4 is try improv or try any kind of theater. And then number 5 is, have a conversation with your younger self, a genuine conversation. And it might take more than one conversation to get to the point where you want to get to. So with that, let me just wrap it up. Is that the food choices that we make, the drink choices that we make, anything that we consume, basically, it doesn't always just boil down to being lazy or not having enough willpower to make better choices. If you're reaching for those Oreos, or if you're reaching for that bottle of beer, or whatever it is that you're consuming, there is a reason behind it. It just takes a while to tune in and realize that there is a reason behind the choice that you're making. Because ultimately, our body has one job, and one job alone, and that is to protect us at all costs. So when you're turning to food, when you're turning to alcohol to deal with your feelings, that's your body trying to protect you. So respect that, appreciate that, be aware of it, and only then will you be able to move on to a place where you want to be. So I know that was a lot of information, especially very sensitive information. I just want to clarify, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a food expert, but I am a health coach. I do have experience and understanding of this, and that is why I wanted to share this video, because a lot of times we confuse that excessive weight gain or even that obesity with genetics, or just making bad choices. But there is something to be said for that. There is a story behind it, and we need to face that story and come to terms with that story. So thank you so much for your time, for listening very patiently. And if you ever want to learn more about what I do and how I help my clients, you can check out my website. It's www.imperfectbodies.com. I hope you have a safe and happy week, and I will catch you here next week. Thank you so much. Take care.